July 7th, 1944. 5:47 a.m. Saipan Island. Ben Solomon pulls the trigger. The machine gun explodes to life. 50 rounds tear through the first wave of Japanese soldiers. Bodies drop. He keeps firing. Another wave comes. He kills them too. The barrel turns red from heat. He does not stop. A bullet punches through his left side. He feels it, ignores it, keeps firing. Another bullet. His shoulder this time. Blood runs down his arm. He switches hands, keeps firing. A Japanese soldier reaches his position with a bayonet. Ben shoots him in the face at point-blank range. Returns to the charging masses. Keeps firing. They keep coming. Hundreds. Thousands. The largest suicide attack of the entire Pacific War. 5,000 screaming Japanese soldiers against one man with a machine gun. One man who was never supposed to be here. One man the army had forbidden from combat. One man they laughed at because he was just a dentist. 24 hours earlier, the soldiers called him Doc Hollywood, a Beverly Hills dentist who cleaned teeth for movie stars. A soft man with soft hands who did not belong anywhere near a battlefield. 24 hours later, he would kill 100 Japanese soldiers, alone, while bleeding from 76 bullet wounds and more than 20 bayonet stabs. This is the story of Captain Benjamin Solomon, the deadliest dentist in American military history. The Pacific War in 1944 was a meat grinder. Island after island, beach after beach. American boys dying by the thousands to capture tiny specks of land most people had never heard of. Tarawa, Kwajalein, and Eniwetok, each name written in blood. But Saipan was different. Saipan would put American bombers within striking distance of Tokyo. For the first time, the United States could hit Japan where it hurt most: their cities, their factories, their homes. The Japanese knew this. They would rather die than let Saipan fall. 30,000 Japanese troops dug into that island. They turned every cave into a fortress, every hill into a killing zone. They swore an oath to their emperor: no surrender, no retreat, death before dishonor. The Americans landed on June 15, 1944. The killing started immediately and never stopped. Hundreds of casualties every single day. Men torn apart by artillery. Men shot by snipers they never saw. Men stabbed in their foxholes by infiltrators who crept through the darkness like ghosts. This was not war. This was hell. And somewhere in that hell was a dentist who had spent 2 years begging to be there. Benjamin Louis Solomon came into this world on September 1st, 1914, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His parents were Jewish immigrants who had escaped the violence of Eastern Europe. They wanted safety for their son. They wanted him to have a profession, something respectable, something that would keep him far from danger. Ben had other ideas. While other children played games, Ben earned his Eagle Scout badge. He learned to shoot. He learned to survive in the wilderness. He learned to push his body beyond what anyone thought possible. His scoutmasters said he could march for days without rest. His teachers said he had iron in his blood. But his father wanted him to be a dentist. His uncle had been one back in the old country. Good money, respected work, safe. Ben agreed. Not because he wanted safety, because he liked precision. He liked fixing things. He liked the idea of taking away someone's pain. Getting into dental school nearly broke him. In 1930s America, Universities had quotas for Jewish students. Some schools accepted only 3%. Ben fought through anyway. Marquette University first, then USC when they had an opening. He worked jobs to pay tuition, studied harder than anyone in his class, graduated in 1937 when most Jewish students had already given up. By 1940, Dr. Benjamin Solomon had a thriving practice in Beverly Hills. Movie stars in his chair, money in his pocket, beautiful women on his arm. The American dream delivered exactly as promised. Then Hitler invaded Poland. Ben read the newspapers. He knew what the Nazis were doing to Jews in Europe. The roundups, the camps, the disappearances. His own family had fled this kind of hatred a generation ago. Now it was spreading like a disease across the entire continent. He could not sit in Beverly Hills cleaning teeth while his people were being murdered. Ben walked into the Army recruitment office the next day. The recruiter looked at his credentials and sent him home. Too many volunteers. Try again later. He tried the Canadian Army. They were already fighting. Rejected. Not a citizen. He went back to his practice and waited. Watched the news every night. France fell. Britain stood alone. Russia bled. And Ben Solomon sat in California, helpless. When his draft notice finally arrived in 1940, he felt something strange. Not fear. Relief. Basic training with the 102nd Infantry Regiment, October 1940. The other recruits saw a Beverly Hills dentist with manicured hands and laughed. Figured he would quit after the first 5-mile march. Figured he would cry the first time a drill sergeant screamed in his face. They were wrong. On the rifle range, Ben qualified expert marksman, the highest rating possible, both pistol and rifle. The instructors asked where he learned to shoot like that. Boy Scouts, he said. They stopped laughing. During physical training, he outperformed men half his age. During forced marches, he finished first and then went back to help stragglers carry their gear. His commanding officer pulled him aside after 4 weeks. Solomon, you are the best soldier I have ever trained. Within a year, Ben made sergeant. They gave him command of a machine gun section. 4 M1917 Browning heavy machine guns, 93 pounds each, 450 rounds per minute. The kind of firepower that could stop an enemy charge cold. Ben fell in love, not with the killing. He had not killed anyone yet, but with the precision, knowing exactly where every bullet would land, coordinating fire patterns, reading terrain. It was like dentistry with explosives. Methodical, exact, perfect. This was what he was born to do. He knew it in his bones. Then the Army looked at his file. Doctor of Dental Surgery. DDS. Those 3 letters changed everything. You are being transferred to the Dental Corps, they told him. Ben felt his stomach drop. Sir, I request to stay with the infantry. Request denied. The Army needs dentists. He went to his commanding officer, begged him to intervene. The CO wrote a letter recommending Ben for infantry commission instead of dental assignment. The letter came back stamped in red. Request denied. Some general in Washington had decided that dentists were too valuable to waste in combat. Ben Solomon, the best soldier his commander had ever seen, was going to spend the war filling cavities. They shipped him to Hawaii. Safe, comfortable, thousands of miles from any fighting. Nice beaches, good food, pretty nurses at the officers' club. Most men would have been grateful. Ben was furious. Every morning he reported to the dental clinic, saw patients, filled cavities, extracted teeth. He was good at it. Fast, gentle. The soldiers respected him, called him Doc Solomon. Every afternoon he changed into combat gear and joined the infantry for training. The other officers thought he had lost his mind. "You are a dentist. Nobody expects you to do this. Go back to your clinic. Enjoy paradise." Ben ignored them. He ran every obstacle course, made every 20-mile march in full pack through jungle heat that broke younger men. Fired on every range until his scores stayed perfect. Week after week, month after month. For 2 years. He entered every regimental competition. Marksmanship, endurance, tactics. He won them all. Colonel Leonard Bishop watched him during a field exercise and said something that would prove prophetic. "Solomon is the best instructor in infantry tactics I have ever seen. Half my officers should be learning from him." The regular soldiers noticed too. This dentist, this officer who had every excuse to stay comfortable, out there sweating and bleeding with them, never complaining, never quitting, never pulling rank. One soldier remembered years later. Ben gave everybody who met him a lift. You would see this dentist covered in mud, grinning like it was Christmas morning, and you would think, if he can do this, what is my excuse? Ben Solomon was preparing for something. He did not know what. He did not know when, but he knew his moment would come. June 1944. The 105th Infantry Regiment shipped out for Saipan. Ben went with them. Still a dentist. Still forbidden from combat. Still waiting. On June 22nd, a Japanese mortar found the 2nd Battalion surgeon. The blast left the medical unit without a doctor. Men were bleeding out with no one qualified to save them. Ben stepped forward. "I will take the aid station until you find a replacement." His commander hesitated. Dentists were not trained for trauma surgery. They learned about teeth, not arterial bleeding, not chest wounds, not men screaming as their intestines spilled onto stretchers. But Ben had medical training, more than anyone else available, and men were dying. "All right, Solomon, the job is yours." Captain Benjamin Solomon, DDS, was finally going to war. He set up his aid station 50 yards behind the front line, close enough to get casualties quickly, close enough that he could hear the fighting day and night. He worked around the clock. Triage, surgery, stabilization. Procedures he had never been trained for. Techniques he invented on the spot, because the alternative was watching young men die. When you have a 19-year-old bleeding out on your table, when you can see the terror in his eyes, when he is calling for his mother, you learn fast. You have to. By July 6th, the Americans had pushed the Japanese into a corner. Only 5,000 enemy soldiers remained from the original 30,000, starving, exhausted, almost out of ammunition, but not defeated. That night, General Yoshitsugu Saito gathered his officers in a cave. He knew there would be no victory, no rescue, no tomorrow. He gave his final order. "We will attack at dawn. Every man will charge. Every man will die fighting. Each soldier will kill 10 Americans before he falls." This was Gyokusai, shattering the jewel. An ancient warrior tradition. When defeat is certain, you do not surrender. You take as many enemies with you as possible. You die with honor. 5,000 men prepared to die. Their target was 2 battalions of the 105th Infantry, 1,100 Americans defending a beach near Tanapag village. Ben Solomon's aid station sat right behind them. The night of July 6th crawled by in darkness and fear. American soldiers in their foxholes heard movement in the jungle. Footsteps. Whispers in Japanese. Metal clicking against metal. Some swore they could smell sake. Small groups of Japanese soldiers probed the line throughout the night. 5 men here, 10 men there, testing, searching for weakness. The Americans drove them back, but nobody slept. Everyone knew these probes were just the beginning. The real attack was coming with the dawn. 1,100 exhausted Americans, 5,000 Japanese soldiers, ready to die. The largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War was about to begin. And standing in its path was a dentist with a machine gun. They did not know about him. The Japanese officers planning their final charge had no idea that behind the American lines was a man who had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this moment. A man who could outshoot any soldier in the regiment. A man who knew the M1917 Browning machine gun like a surgeon knows his scalpel. They did not know that before the sun climbed high over Saipan, Captain Benjamin Solomon would kill 100 of them with his own hands. They did not know that this dentist would become the deadliest single combatant in the Pacific Theater. They did not know that they were about to meet a man the Army said was too valuable for combat. At 4:45 a.m. on July 7, 1944, flares shot into the sky, and 5,000 screaming Japanese soldiers charged out of the jungle. In Part 2, we will witness the most extraordinary last stand of World War II. One man against an army. A dentist against 5,000 enemies. A sacrifice so incredible that it would take America 58 years to properly honor it. The Battle of Tannapag is about to begin, and Ben Solomon is about to prove every general who doubted him dead wrong. In Part 1, you met Benjamin Solomon, a Beverly Hills dentist who could outshoot every soldier in his regiment, a man the Army forbade from combat because they decided dentists were too valuable to fight. For 2 years, he begged them to let him join the infantry. For 2 years, they refused. Now he stands behind his aid station on Saipan. July 7th, 1944, 4:45 a.m. 5,000 Japanese soldiers are about to launch the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War. 1,100 Americans stand in their path. Ben Solomon is about to prove every general who doubted him dead wrong. And this is where everything becomes a nightmare. The flares shot up at 4:45 a.m. White light turned night into day, and out of the jungle came hell itself. 5,000 Japanese soldiers, screaming, running, bayonets fixed. They stretched across a mile of beach in a human tidal wave. The sound was unlike anything the Americans had ever heard. Thousands of voices screaming, "Tenno Heika Banzai!" in perfect unison. "Long live the Emperor!" the battle cry of men who had already accepted death. Major Edward McCarthy commanded the 2nd Battalion. He would later describe what he saw in words that still haunt historians. It reminded me of one of those old cattle stampede scenes in the movies. The camera is in a hole in the ground, and you see the herd coming, and then they leap up and over you and are gone. Only the Japs just kept coming and coming. I did not think they would ever stop. The Americans opened fire with everything they had. Machine guns swept the charging masses. Tracers cut red lines through the darkness. Artillery shells exploded among the Japanese ranks. Bodies flew through the air. Blood sprayed across the sand. It was not enough. The Japanese kept coming. They climbed over their dead comrades without slowing down. Some carried rifles. Some carried bamboo spears. Some carried nothing but knives tied to sticks. Some carried nothing at all, except the determination to die killing Americans. One Marine artillery battery lowered their 105mm howitzers to point-blank range. They loaded canister rounds. Essentially, turned their artillery into giant shotguns. They fired directly into the charging mass at 50 yards. Japanese soldiers exploded. Dozens fell with every blast. Still, they kept coming. By 5 a.m., the American line was collapsing. Japanese soldiers poured through gaps in the perimeter. The organized crack of rifle fire dissolved into the desperate sounds of hand-to-hand combat. Men fought with bayonets, with knives, with fists, with teeth. Screams in English mixed with screams in Japanese. The 1st Battalion took the initial impact. They fought like demons. But 5,000 against 500 is mathematics, not courage. Men fell, positions crumbled, the line bent, then broke. Japanese soldiers flooded through. They did not stop to consolidate. They kept running toward the rear areas, toward the artillery batteries, toward the command posts, toward the aid station. Ben Solomon heard the fighting grow closer with every passing minute. His tent was packed with 30 wounded men, some missing limbs, some with their intestines held in by bloody bandages, some calling for morphine, some calling for their mothers. The smell of blood and fear filled the air so thick you could taste it. Ben moved from stretcher to stretcher. Triage. This one first. He might live. This one can wait. This one, there is nothing I can do. His hands stayed steady, even as the sounds of battle came closer, even as the screaming grew louder, even as Japanese voices began mixing with the American ones. Then the tent flap burst open. A Japanese soldier rushed in, bayonet raised, eyes wild. He was heading straight for a wounded American lying helpless on a stretcher near the entrance. Ben did not think. Instinct took over. He grabbed an M1 Garand rifle from a nearby table, dropped into a firing position, pulled the trigger. The Japanese soldier's head snapped back. He collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Ben turned back to his patients. Too many wounded, not enough time. The sounds of battle were right outside now. 2 more Japanese soldiers pushed through the entrance. The first one was fast, already swinging his rifle. Ben did not have time to aim. He used his Garand like a club, smashed the stock across the man's face. Bones cracked. The soldier dropped. The second came at him with a bayonet. Ben reversed his rifle, jammed the butt into the man's chest, heard ribs break. Shot one, bayoneted the other. He barely caught his breath. 4 more enemy soldiers crawled under the tent walls, 2 from each side, coming from all directions at once. The tent erupted into chaos. Wounded men screamed, tried to roll off their stretchers. Medics scrambled for cover. A corpsman grabbed a pistol and fired wildly. Ben moved like a man possessed. He kicked a knife out of one soldier's hand, grabbed it, shot the man with his rifle, bayoneted the second, spun, stabbed the third with the captured knife. The fourth came at him. Ben, out of bullets, out of options, headbutted him in the face. The Japanese soldier staggered back. A wounded sergeant with a shattered leg managed to draw his Colt .45 and put 2 rounds into the enemy's chest. Silence. Or what passed for silence. The battle still raged outside, but inside the tent, nothing moved except Ben Solomon, standing in the middle of 8 dead Japanese soldiers, covered in blood, most of it not his own. 30 wounded men stared at him, terror and awe in their eyes. 8 enemy soldiers, 1 dentist, in less than 2 minutes. Ben looked around, assessed the situation. Japanese soldiers were everywhere outside. The American line had completely collapsed. His aid station was now behind enemy lines. More Japanese would come, many more. He could not save these men by treating their wounds. Not anymore. He could only save them by killing. Ben made a decision that would cost him his life. "Get the wounded out," he ordered. "Everyone who can move, start heading for the regimental aid station. Help the ones who cannot walk." One of the medics found his voice. "Sir, that is hundreds of yards through open ground. We do not know if—" "Do it now!" Ben's voice left no room for argument. He grabbed a fresh rifle from one of the dead Japanese soldiers, checked the magazine, fixed the bayonet. "I will hold them off until you get to safety." "Captain, you cannot—" "That is an order." Those were the last words anyone heard Benjamin Solomon speak. He ran out of the tent and into the apocalypse. The 2nd Battalion was disintegrating. There was no front anymore. No rear. Just scattered groups of Americans fighting desperately against a tide that seemed to have no end. Men running, fighting, dying. Japanese soldiers everywhere. Near his aid station, Ben spotted something that changed everything. A .30 caliber M1917 Browning machine gun, set up in a sandbag position. The same type of gun he had commanded back in the 102nd Infantry. The same gun they had trained him on before deciding he was too valuable for combat. 4 soldiers had been manning it. All 4 were dead, slumped over the sandbags, one still gripping the ammunition belt. Ben ran to the gun, shoved the nearest body aside, sat down behind the weapon. He checked the belt, half full, swung the barrel toward the enemy, and opened fire. The M1917 Browning was devastating in trained hands. Water-cooled, belt-fed, capable of sustained fire that could cut down waves of attackers. It fired 450 rounds per minute, heavy enough to stay on target through continuous firing. Ben Solomon's hands had been trained for exactly this. Back when he commanded a machine gun section in the 102nd. Back when the Army still thought he was worth something more than filling cavities. Back before some general decided dentists did not belong in combat. 2 years of forced dental work. 2 years of begging for combat duty. 2 years of training, anyway, just in case. All of it led to this moment. The Japanese charged his position. Ben cut them down. First wave, 10 soldiers. He swept the gun left to right. They fell like wheat before a scythe. Second wave, 20 soldiers. He adjusted his aim, kept the barrel moving. Bodies dropped. Third wave, 30 soldiers. The barrel was getting hot now, steam rising from the water jacket. He did not stop. They came screaming out of the chaos, bayonets fixed, determined to overrun this single machine gunner who was shredding their comrades. Ben killed them all. Reload, fire, reload, fire. A bullet hit him in the left side. He felt the impact, felt the warmth of blood soaking through his shirt. He ignored it, kept firing. Another bullet, his shoulder this time, kept firing. A Japanese soldier got within 10 yards with a bayonet raised. Ben shot him in the chest, kept firing. A grenade landed near his position, exploded. Shrapnel tore into his arms and legs. Kept firing. The bodies began piling up in front of his gun. First 1 layer, then 2, 3. Ben killed so many men so quickly that the corpses formed a wall. Behind him, the wounded were escaping, crawling, limping, being carried by their buddies, heading for the safety of the regimental aid station hundreds of yards away. Every second Ben stayed on that gun was another second for them to get away. He bought those seconds with blood. His blood. Japanese blood. More of both mixing in the sand with every minute that passed. The barrel glowed orange now, hot enough to burn flesh. The water in the cooling jacket was boiling. Still they came, wave after wave after wave, and Ben Solomon kept killing them. By 6 a.m., he had been hit at least a dozen times. Bullets, bayonets, shrapnel. His uniform was torn and soaked with blood. The pile of bodies in front of his gun had grown so high he could not see over it anymore. Any other man would have stayed put, would have accepted that he had done enough, that no one could ask more. Ben Solomon was not any other man. He grabbed the machine gun, all 93 pounds of it, and dragged it to a new position. Bleeding from wounds he had stopped counting, strength fading with every step. He set up the gun, fed in a fresh belt, and started killing again. The sun was rising over Saipan now, golden light spreading across a beach covered with the dead and dying. The largest banzai charge of the Pacific War was still not finished. And neither was the dentist. In Part 3, we will witness the final hours of Captain Benjamin Solomon. We will count the bodies. We will learn why one man alone killed 100 enemy soldiers. And we will discover the shameful reason why America refused to honor him for 58 years. The bodies are piling up. The ammunition is running low. And Ben Solomon is about to make his last stand. In Part 1, you met Benjamin Solomon, a Beverly Hills dentist the Army forbade from combat. For 2 years he begged to fight. For 2 years they refused. In Part 2, you watched him take command of a machine gun as 5,000 Japanese soldiers launched the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War. You saw him kill wave after wave of enemy soldiers. You saw him take bullet after bullet and refuse to stop. Now the sun is rising over Saipan. Ben Solomon has been fighting for over an hour. He has been shot at least a dozen times. He has repositioned his machine gun once already because the bodies piled too high to see. And the Japanese are still coming. This is no longer a battle. This is an execution. And the executioner is a dentist who was never supposed to be here. The Japanese officers could not understand what was happening. Their plan had been perfect. 5,000 men charging at dawn, overwhelming force against exhausted defenders. The Americans should have broken in minutes, should have run, should have died. Instead, something was wrong. Reports came back from the front, confused, terrified. One machine gun position was cutting down entire companies, dozens of men falling every minute. The attack was stalling in one sector while succeeding everywhere else. One gun, one position, holding back hundreds. Japanese sergeants screamed at their men to keep charging. Officers drew their swords and led from the front. They threw everything they had at that single position. Wave after wave, and wave after wave died. By 6:30 a.m., the pile of corpses in front of Ben Solomon's gun had grown so high that he had to move again. Think about that. He had killed so many men that their bodies formed a wall of flesh and bone and blood that blocked his field of fire. He could not see the enemy anymore because there were too many dead enemies in the way. Any sane man would have retreated, found cover, waited for reinforcement. Ben Solomon grabbed that 93-pound machine gun and dragged it to a new position. He was bleeding from more than 20 wounds now. Bullets, bayonets, shrapnel. His uniform was soaked through. His hands were slippery with blood. Every movement sent agony through his body. He set up the gun, fed in a fresh belt, found his targets, and started killing again. Behind him, the wounded were still escaping, crawling, limping, being dragged by their buddies. Every second Ben stayed on that gun was another second for them to reach safety. He was buying their lives with his own blood, and the price kept getting higher. The Japanese changed tactics. Frontal assault was not working. Too many men were dying before they could close the distance. So they tried flanking. Small groups of soldiers circling around, trying to hit the machine gunner from the sides. Ben saw them coming, swung the gun, cut them down. They tried grenades. Soldiers ran forward, threw their explosives, and dove for cover. Grenades exploded around Ben's position. Shrapnel tore into his legs, his arms, his back. He kept firing. They tried snipers. Riflemen found elevated positions and took careful aim at the lone machine gunner. A bullet hit Ben in the chest. He felt it punch through, felt something break inside. Blood filled his mouth. He spat it out and kept firing. The Japanese soldiers who survived that morning would later describe it as fighting a demon, a man who would not die, a man who absorbed bullets like they were raindrops, a man who killed and killed and killed until the ground itself seemed to drink blood. They did not know he was a dentist. They did not know the army had told him he was too valuable for combat. They only knew that he was killing them, and they could not stop him. By 7 a.m., Ben had repositioned the machine gun for the third time. Another wall of corpses. Another pile of dead Japanese soldiers so high he could not see over it. His movements were slower now. Blood loss was taking its toll. His vision was starting to blur. His hands were shaking. But the trigger still worked, and he could still aim. He dragged the gun 15 yards to the left, set it up on a small rise that gave him a clear field of fire, loaded the last belt of ammunition. The Japanese came again. Ben fired until the belt ran dry. Then he picked up a rifle. The final phase of the battle was hand-to-hand. Japanese soldiers finally reached his position. Bayonets fixed, swords drawn, screaming as they threw themselves at the man who had killed so many of their comrades. Ben shot the first one, bayoneted the second, clubbed the third with his rifle stock. A bayonet found his shoulder. He pulled it out and stabbed his attacker with it. A sword slashed his arm. He grabbed the blade with his bare hand, yanked the weapon away, and killed its owner. Blood everywhere. His blood. Their blood. Mixed together in the sand until you could not tell whose was whose. More Japanese. Always more. Ben killed them, one by one, until his rifle was empty. Until his bayonet was stuck in a dead man's chest, until he had nothing left but his fists and his fury and his refusal to die. Nobody knows exactly when Captain Benjamin Solomon fell. Nobody knows which wound finally killed him. There were so many. 76 bullet holes, more than 20 bayonet wounds. A medical examiner would later determine that at least 24 of those wounds had been inflicted while Ben was still alive. He had been shot and stabbed literally to pieces. And he had kept fighting until his body simply could not function anymore. The last thing Ben Solomon saw was the sunrise over Saipan, golden light spreading across a beach covered with the dead. And among those dead were 100 Japanese soldiers, killed by one man, a dentist who was never supposed to be in combat. The Battle of Tanapag lasted 15 hours. When it finally ended, the cost was staggering. The 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry had suffered 918 casualties, 406 killed, 512 wounded. Over 80% of their total strength gone in a single night. It was one of the worst single-day losses any American unit suffered in the entire Pacific War. But the Japanese had fared even worse. More than 4,300 dead. Their bodies carpeted the Tannapag Plain. The largest banzai charge of the war had been broken. On July 8th, American forces retook the positions that had been overrun. Major General George Greiner, the division commander, personally led the team that surveyed the carnage. They were looking for survivors, looking for intelligence, looking for anything that might explain what had happened during those hellish 15 hours. They found Ben Solomon's body slumped over his machine gun. Captain Edmund Love was the division historian. He was part of the team that found Ben. Years later, he would describe what they saw in words that still echo through history. There were 98 Japanese bodies piled up in front of his gun position. Solomon had killed so many men that he had been forced to move the gun 4 different times in order to get a clear field of fire. But the number was actually higher. When they examined the area more carefully, when they counted the bodies scattered around all 4 positions, when they added the men Ben had killed with rifle and bayonet during the final hand-to-hand fighting, the total reached 100. 1 man, 1 machine gun, 100 dead enemies. Captain Love continued his account. One could easily visualize Ben Solomon, wounded and bleeding, trying to drag that gun a few more feet so that he would have a new field of fire. The blood was on the ground, and the marks plainly indicated how hard it must have been for him, especially in that last move. The medical examination of Ben's body was almost impossible to complete. 76 bullet wounds. They stopped counting bayonet wounds somewhere around 20. His hands were cut to ribbons from grabbing enemy blades. His uniform was more blood than fabric. The examining physician determined that at least 24 of those wounds had been inflicted while Ben was still alive and fighting. He had absorbed damage that would have killed any normal man 10 times over. And he had kept killing until there was nothing left. The soldiers who survived because Ben bought them time. The wounded who escaped because one dentist held back an army. They told anyone who would listen what had happened. A machine gunner, just one, holding off thousands, killing hundreds, giving them the minutes they needed to reach safety. The stories spread through the regiment, then the division, then the entire Pacific Theater. The dentist of Saipan, Doc Hollywood, the man who was too valuable for combat. He had proven them all wrong, and it had cost him everything. Captain Edmund Love gathered eyewitness accounts, interviewed survivors, documented every detail he could find, and then he prepared a recommendation for the highest honor the United States military can bestow, the Medal of Honor. Ben Solomon's heroism seemed beyond dispute. 100 enemy dead, dozens of American wounded evacuated to safety. The ultimate sacrifice in defense of his patients. The recommendation went up the chain of command, and it was denied. Major General Greiner, the division commander, refused to approve it. His reason was so absurd, so infuriating, that it would haunt Ben Solomon's memory for nearly 6 decades. Ben had been wearing a Red Cross brassard, the armband that identified him as a medical officer. Under the Geneva Convention, medical personnel were not supposed to bear arms against the enemy. The irony was staggering. The Japanese had attacked a clearly marked medical aid station. They had bayoneted wounded men on their stretchers. They had violated every rule of warfare ever written. and the American general's response was to deny a medal to the man who stopped them. Because of a technicality. Never mind that medical personnel were specifically allowed to use weapons in defense of themselves and their patients. Never mind that Ben had no choice. It was fight or watch his patients be slaughtered. The bureaucracy said no. In 1951, Captain Love tried again. The recommendation was returned without action. Time limit expired. In 1969, the Surgeon General of the United States Army tried again. The recommendation made it all the way to the Secretary of Defense, returned without explanation. For 58 years, Benjamin Salomon's sacrifice went officially unrecognized. The dentist who killed 100 Japanese soldiers, the man who saved dozens of American lives, the soldier who proved that courage has nothing to do with your job title. Forgotten. Until one man decided to change that. In Part 4, we will discover how a dental school professor became obsessed with a 60-year-old injustice. We will learn how he fought the Pentagon bureaucracy for years. And we will finally see Benjamin Salomon receive the honor he earned with his blood on a beach in Saipan. The battle is over, but the real fight is just beginning. In Part 1, you met Benjamin Salomon, a Beverly Hills dentist who could outshoot every soldier in his regiment. A man the Army forbade from combat because they decided dentists were too valuable to fight. In Part 2, you watched him take command of a machine gun as 5,000 Japanese soldiers launched the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War. In Part 3, you witnessed his final stand. One man against an army, 76 bullet wounds, more than 20 bayonet stabs, 100 Japanese soldiers killed by his hands alone. Captain Benjamin Salomon died on July 7, 1944. He was 29 years old. He never married, never had children, never went back to his practice in Beverly Hills. But his story does not end on that blood-soaked beach in Saipan. Because what happened after his death is almost as unbelievable as what happened during it. This is the story of how America failed its greatest hero, and how one man spent years fighting to make it right. Benjamin Salomon left behind almost nothing. No wife, no children, no siblings. His mother had died before the war. His father, a Jewish immigrant who had fled Eastern Europe to give his son a better life, was still alive when the telegram arrived. We regret to inform you that your son, Captain Benjamin L. Salomon, was killed in action on the island of Saipan. There was no body to bury. Ben was interred in the cemetery on Saipan, among thousands of other American boys who died taking that island. Later, his remains were moved to the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii. A grave marker, a name, a date, nothing more. His father received his personal effects, a few photographs, some letters, the dental instruments Ben had carried to the Pacific. Nothing that could capture who his son really was. Nothing that could explain what he had done in those final hours. For the men who survived because of Ben Salomon, the memory never faded. The wounded soldiers he saved, the medics he ordered to evacuate, the men who escaped while one dentist held back an army. They told the story to anyone who would listen, in hospitals, in bars, at reunions. They made sure people knew what Doc Hollywood had done. But officially, Benjamin Salomon was just another name on a casualty list. Another dead officer in a war that killed hundreds of thousands. The Army had moved on. The war had moved on. The world had moved on. Except for Captain Edmund Love. Love had been there. He had seen the bodies. He had counted the dead Japanese soldiers piled in front of Ben's gun positions. He had examined the blood trails where Ben had dragged that 93-pound machine gun through the sand while dying. He knew what Ben Solomon deserved. In the months after the battle, Love gathered every eyewitness account he could find. He interviewed survivors. He documented the positions, the weapons, the wounds. He built a case that should have been undeniable. One man, 100 enemy killed, dozens of American lives saved. The ultimate sacrifice. He submitted the recommendation for the Medal of Honor, and he was told no. The rejection letter cited the Geneva Convention. Ben had been wearing a Red Cross armband. Medical personnel were not supposed to engage in combat. Therefore, he could not receive the nation's highest military honor. Love was furious. The Japanese had attacked a medical aid station. They had bayoneted wounded men on stretchers. They had violated every law of warfare. And the American military was punishing the man who stopped them because of a technicality? But the bureaucracy had spoken. Case closed. Except Captain Love refused to let it die. In 1951, he tried again. New administration, new leadership. Maybe someone would listen. The recommendation was returned. Time limit for World War II awards had expired. In 1969, the Surgeon General of the United States Army took up the cause. The recommendation reached the Secretary of Defense himself. Returned without action. No explanation. No justification. Just bureaucratic silence. Ben Solomon's father died in 1970. He spent the last years of his life fighting to get his son recognized, writing letters, making phone calls, begging anyone who would listen. He died without seeing justice done. The decades passed. The men who had served with Ben Solomon grew old. The eyewitnesses died, one by one. The story faded from memory. It seemed like Benjamin Solomon would be forgotten forever. But his legacy was not about medals. The lessons Ben Solomon taught did not require official recognition to spread through the military. His story became a case study at military medical schools. The dentist who proved that medical officers could fight. The man who showed that the instinct to protect your patients sometimes meant picking up a weapon instead of a scalpel. The Geneva Convention interpretation that had denied Ben his medal was quietly revised. Medical personnel were explicitly permitted to use weapons in defense of themselves and their patients. The rule that had been used against Ben Solomon became the foundation for protecting medical officers who found themselves in similar situations. Today, military dentists and doctors train for combat. They learn to shoot. They learn tactics. They understand that in modern warfare, there are no safe zones, no rear areas. The enemy does not respect Red Cross armbands. Ben Solomon taught them that lesson with his blood. The 27th Infantry Division Association kept his memory alive. At every reunion, someone would tell the story. The dentist of Saipan, Doc Hollywood, the man who held off an army. Veterans who had never met Ben Solomon spoke his name with reverence. He had become a legend. Not because of medals or official recognition, but because soldiers understand sacrifice in a way that bureaucrats never will. The aid station he defended became a symbol of courage under fire, of the willingness to give everything for your patients, of the principle that a healer can also be a warrior when the moment demands it. Medical officers in Korea carried his example with them, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. When the fighting got close, when the enemy threatened the wounded, they remembered Ben Solomon. They remembered that a dentist had killed 100 enemy soldiers to protect his patients. And they found their own courage. But the lesson Ben Solomon taught extends far beyond the military. It is a lesson about potential. The army looked at Benjamin Solomon and saw a dentist. They saw soft hands. They saw a man who filled cavities and cleaned teeth. They decided he was too valuable for combat, too specialized, too important to waste on the front lines. They were wrong. They looked at credentials instead of character. They saw a degree instead of a man. They made assumptions based on a job title instead of observing what Ben could actually do. For 2 years, the best soldier in his regiment sat behind a desk because someone in Washington decided that dentists do not belong in combat. How many Ben Solomons are out there right now? How many people with extraordinary potential are being held back by systems that cannot see past their labels? The corporate executive who should be an entrepreneur, the teacher who should be a researcher, the accountant who should be leading teams. People trapped in boxes that someone else built for them. Ben Solomon broke out of his box on July 7, 1944. He proved that what you do matters more than what your credentials say you should be. He proved that courage is not about your job title. It is about your character. And he proved it with 100 dead enemies and his own life. Throughout history, the greatest innovations have often come from people who were told they did not belong. The Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics. George Washington Carver was born into slavery. Alan Turing was a mathematician in a world that thought code breaking required linguists. They all shared something with Ben Solomon. They refused to accept the limits others placed on them. The question is not whether you have the credentials. The question is whether you have the will. But there is one final chapter to this story, a chapter that most people have never heard. In 1998, 54 years after Ben Solomon's death, a dental school professor named Robert West was writing a history of the USC School of Dentistry. He came across a brief mention of an alumnus who had died on Saipan. Curious, he dug deeper. He found Captain Love's original recommendation. He found the eyewitness accounts. He found the rejection letters. And he found outrage. Robert West became obsessed. Here was one of the most extraordinary acts of heroism in American military history. And the nation had refused to honor it for more than half a century. He contacted Congressman Brad Sherman. He reached out to the Army Dental Corps. He gathered every document, every account, every piece of evidence he could find. He discovered something that changed everything. The original rejection had been based on a misreading of the Geneva Convention. Medical personnel were always permitted to defend themselves and their patients. The rule had never prohibited what Ben Solomon did. Some general in 1944 had simply gotten it wrong. And for 54 years, no one had bothered to correct the mistake. West fought the Pentagon bureaucracy for 4 years. Letters, meetings, phone calls, congressional hearings. He would not give up. Finally, in 2002, the Secretary of the Army approved the recommendation. 58 years after Benjamin Solomon gave his life on a beach in Saipan, he would finally receive the Medal of Honor. The ceremony was held at the White House on May 1, 2002. President George W. Bush stood at the podium. Behind him hung a portrait of Ben Solomon in his Army uniform. Young, confident, smiling. The Beverly Hills dentist who became a warrior. The room was filled with military officials, historians, representatives from the USC School of Dentistry, veterans who had served in the Pacific. But there was no family. Ben Solomon had been an only child. His father had died 32 years earlier, still fighting for this moment. There were no siblings, no wife, no children. No one who had known Benjamin Solomon personally was still alive. President Bush acknowledged this with words that still resonate. No one who knew him is with us this afternoon. Yet America will always know Benjamin Lewis Solomon by the citation to be read shortly. Robert West accepted the medal on behalf of the USC School of Dentistry. The citation described everything: the aid station, the waves of Japanese attackers, the machine gun, the 4 repositionings, the 100 enemy dead, the 76 bullet wounds, and more than 20 bayonet stabs. It ended with words that captured who Ben Solomon truly was. Captain Solomon's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. The medal now sits in a glass case at the USC School of Dentistry. Students walk past it every day. Future dentists who may never see combat. Future healers who may never need to pick up a weapon. But they see Ben Solomon's face. They read his story. And they understand that courage comes in many forms. From a Beverly Hills dentist with an idea the Army called impossible, to a man who killed 100 enemy soldiers while dying from 76 wounds. Benjamin Solomon proved that what you are is less important than what you are willing to do. He saved dozens of American lives that night on Saipan. He held back an army so that wounded men could escape. He gave everything he had. And then he gave more. For 58 years, his country failed him. But his legacy did not need a medal. It lived in the soldiers he saved, in the medical officers who learned from his example, in everyone who refuses to accept the limits others place on them. Captain Benjamin Lewis Solomon, DDS, Medal of Honor, the deadliest dentist in American history. They told him he did not belong in combat. He proved them wrong with 100 dead enemies and his own immortal courage. If you know another forgotten hero of World War II whose story deserves to be told, share it in the comments below. History is full of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. They deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, because the past is not dead. It is not even past. And sometimes, the greatest warriors are the ones nobody expected.